Suddenly, the loud, aggressive buzzing of the fluorescent lights cut out, replaced by a low, rhythmic, wet thumping sound echoing from the darkness ahead. Something massive was walking toward us on the damp carpet. Story 1. The Maintenance Floor, Dallas, Texas. My name is Nolan. I am going to tell you a story that will make me sound like a terrible person, and honestly, I am. 2 years ago, I was attending a massive, week-long corporate logistics conference at a sprawling, heavily outdated convention hotel in Dallas, Texas. I was a regional manager, married for 5 years, and completely bored with my predictable life. That is when I reconnected with Sylvia. Sylvia was a vendor representative from a rival firm. We had a brief history in college, and the moment we locked eyes at the hotel bar, the old toxic spark ignited. We began a reckless, highly secretive affair over the next 3 days. We needed a place completely off the grid where nobody from the conference could accidentally stumble upon us. On the 4th night, Sylvia grabbed my hand and led me into a service elevator tucked behind the kitchen. She had procured a master keycard from a careless janitor earlier that day. She swiped the card, and we descended to the sub-basement maintenance level, a floor completely restricted from hotel guests. The doors slid open, and the illusion of our sexy, rebellious escapade instantly fractured. The maintenance level did not look like a hotel basement. It looked like an endless, windowless corridor from the 1980s. The walls were covered in peeling, mono-yellow wallpaper that looked sickly and jaundiced under the flickering overhead lights. The floor was covered in a damp, aggressively ugly patterned carpet that squished slightly under my expensive dress shoes, emitting a strong, putrid scent of old, stagnant water and mildew. "Sylvia, this place is disgusting," I muttered, the smell hitting the back of my throat. "Let's just go back to my room. My roommate is out." Sylvia didn't look at me. She was staring straight down the endlessly stretching yellow hallway. Her posture had gone completely rigid. "No," she whispered, her voice sounding oddly distant, almost synthesized. "It's safe here. No one can ever find us here." She dropped my hand and began walking down the corridor at a brisk, unnatural pace. I followed her, annoyed and increasingly uneasy. The red flags were waving violently. The loud, relentless, electrical buzzing of the fluorescent lights was deafening, making my teeth ache. We walked for what felt like 10 minutes, passing dozens of identical, unmarked wooden doors. I looked back over my shoulder and realized I could no longer see the elevator bank. The hallway behind us simply stretched into infinity, a terrifying converging point of endless yellow walls. I stopped dead in my tracks, panic finally piercing through my alcohol-induced haze. "Sylvia, stop! I'm turning around!" Sylvia stopped walking. She was about 30 feet ahead of me in the dim yellow light. She slowly turned around to face me, but it wasn't Sylvia. The clothing was hers, the black dress, the heels. But her face had completely smoothed over. She had no eyes, no nose, and no mouth. It was just a blank, fleshy canvas stretched tightly over a skull. I stumbled backward, the damp carpet squelching under my feet. I opened my mouth to scream, but the air in my lungs was completely gone. The faceless entity that was wearing Sylvia's clothes raised a hand and pointed directly at me. Suddenly, the deafening buzz of the fluorescent lights completely cut out. The lights didn't turn off, but the sound vanished, replaced by the terrifying, distinct audio of my wife's voice. "Where are you, Nolan?" My wife's voice echoed from the blank face of the entity, distorted and dripping with profound sorrow. "Why are you doing this to us?" Pure, unadulterated terror violently hijacked my nervous system. I spun around and sprinted blindly back down the endless yellow corridor. My chest heaved, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The physical geometry of the space completely broke down. I ran for agonizing minutes, but I never reached the elevator. I only encountered more identical intersections, branching off into more endless, damp, yellow hallways. The environment was a physical manifestation of an inescapable trap. I frantically tried opening the unmarked wooden doors lining the walls. The first 3 were completely locked, the brass knobs refusing to budge. The 4th door finally swung open. I threw myself inside, slamming the heavy wooden door behind me and locking the deadbolt. I was standing in a small, windowless office space. The carpet here was dry, but the yellow wallpaper was peeling aggressively. I backed into the corner, hyperventilating, trying to pull my phone from my pocket to call 911. There was absolutely no signal, just searching, blinking on the screen. Then, the doorknob slowly began to rattle. The entity was on the other side. "Nolan?" My wife's voice called out from the hallway, sounding wet and guttural now. "You can't hide your sins in the dark. Open the door, Nolan." I backed away until my spine hit the plaster wall. I watched in absolute paralyzing horror as the solid wooden door began to warp and splinter inward, as if a massive, invisible pressure was being applied from the corridor. The wood groaned, cracking down the center. A pale, long, multi-jointed finger forced its way through the splintered wood, blindly feeling around for the deadbolt. The finger was impossibly long, featuring too many knuckles, and it smelled intensely of rotting meat and ozone. Survival instinct, raw and feral, took over. I looked frantically around the small room. In the opposite corner, there was a heavy metal ventilation grate secured to the baseboard. I dove across the floor, scraping my knees on the carpet, and desperately tore at the screws with my bare fingers, tearing my fingernails until they bled. The heavy door behind me violently buckled, the hinges screaming. I ripped the grate off the wall and squeezed my body headfirst into the narrow, freezing, galvanized steel duct. My army crawled furiously into the pitch-black space, sharp sheet metal slicing my arms and face. Behind me, I heard the heavy wooden door absolutely shatter. "Nolan!" The distorted, demonic voice of my wife shrieked, echoing terrifyingly into the metal vent. I crawled blindly in the dark for what felt like hours, claustrophobia and raw panic squeezing my throat. The air grew incredibly stale and suffocating. Eventually, the metal duct gave way, and I plummeted downward. I fell roughly 10 feet, crashing violently through a drop ceiling and landing hard on a polished marble floor. I groaned, my body battered and bleeding. I looked up. I was lying in the middle of a brightly lit, heavily populated lobby. It was the convention center hotel. Dozens of people were staring at me in absolute shock. The concierge was already running over with a radio in his hand. I scrambled to my feet, looking up at the shattered ceiling tiles I had fallen through. There was no yellow wallpaper. There was no damp carpet. It was just a standard HVAC vent. I immediately went to the front desk and demanded they check Sylvia's room. When security finally breached her room, it was completely empty. All of her luggage was there, her purse was on the bed, but she was gone. The police were called. A massive investigation was launched, but Sylvia was never found. The hotel denied the existence of any sub-basement maintenance level matching my description. They claimed the service elevator I used only went to the laundry facility, which looked nothing like the yellow labyrinth I had been trapped in. I survived, but my marriage did not. Submitted anonymously to the deep web forum liminalsurvivor.net. Location, Dallas, Texas. Date of incident, October 2024. Story 2. The Concrete Grid, Cleveland, Ohio. My name is Julian. Affairs are expensive, not just emotionally, but logistically. When you are deeply entangled in a toxic, illicit relationship, you need a safe house. Camille and I were both married to other people. The paranoia of getting caught in our hometown of Cleveland was overwhelming, so we resorted to extreme measures. I rented a large climate-controlled unit at a massive 24-hour indoor storage facility on the industrial outskirts of the city. We furnished it with a cheap mattress, some battery-powered lamps, and a space heater. It was pathetic, but it was incredibly private. The facility was a sprawling, concrete labyrinth of identical orange doors and fluorescent lights. At 2 a.m., the place was completely deserted. It was our twisted concrete sanctuary. The nightmare began on a freezing Tuesday in February. Camille and I had been in the unit for a few hours. The heavy metal roll-up door was pulled down and locked from the inside. We were lying in the dark, the small space heater humming quietly. Suddenly, the space heater aggressively sparked and completely died. The battery-powered lamps flickered violently before plunging us into total darkness. "Did the power go out?" Camille whispered, her voice tight with sudden anxiety. I fumbled in the dark for my phone, turning on the flashlight app. "I'll go check the hallway," I said, sliding on my jeans. I unlocked the heavy metal door and rolled it up. The main corridor was still brightly lit by the harsh, flickering fluorescent tubes on the ceiling. But something was fundamentally, deeply wrong. The air in the hallway was freezing, drastically colder than the climate-controlled standard, and the absolute silence was deafening. There was no hum of the massive HVAC units, no distant traffic noise from the highway outside. It was a suffocating, pressurized deadness. I stepped out into the hallway, leaving the unit door cracked open. "Hello?" I called out. My voice didn't echo. It was instantly swallowed by the concrete. I looked at the bright orange door of my unit. The painted number, which had always been 408, was gone. In its place was a strange, jagged, unrecognizable black symbol that looked like a distorted, bleeding eye. I spun around, shining my light down the corridor. Every single orange door now bore a different, horrifying, nonsensical symbol. Panic immediately flooded my system. "Camille, get dressed right now. We have to leave," I ordered, turning back to my unit. I grabbed the metal handle and threw the door completely open. My flashlight beam cut through the dark interior. The unit was completely empty. The cheap mattress, the space heater, the lamps, our clothes, everything was gone. And so was Camille. The room was just bare, cold concrete. "Camille!" I screamed, spinning wildly into the hallway. From the far end of the impossibly long corridor, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was a woman, facing away from me. She had Camille's dark hair, and she was wearing the exact coat Camille had worn that night. "Camille! What the hell is going on?" I yelled, sprinting down the hallway toward her. As I closed the distance, the woman stopped walking. She slowly turned around to face me. The horrific, mind-shattering reality of the Backrooms hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't Camille. The entity's face was a chaotic, swirling mass of digital static, like a corrupted television screen. It emitted a low, electronic, buzzing growl that vibrated painfully in my jaw. And it was holding something in its pale, unnaturally long hands. It was my wife's wedding ring. The exact ring I had bought her 5 years ago. The entity let out a shrieking, metallic wail and lunged at me with terrifying, inhuman speed. I turned and bolted in the opposite direction. I sprinted blindly through the endless, repeating grid of concrete corridors and identical orange doors. The facility was a maze that completely defied the laws of physics. I ran past the same intersection 3 times. The numbers on the walls shifted into horrifying, bloody murals depicting my deepest, darkest guilts. I saw painted images of my wife crying, images of my own funeral, images of Camille burning. I was trapped in a highly personalized, psychological purgatory. The entity was relentless, its heavy footsteps echoing right behind me. It was hunting me, fueled by the immense, toxic guilt of my infidelity. I took a sharp left turn, my lungs burning, completely out of breath. I crashed violently into a heavy steel emergency exit door at the end of a long, dark corridor. I pounded my fists against the metal, screaming for help. The door was locked. I turned around, pressing my back against the cold steel. The entity was slowly walking down the hallway toward me, the static on its face shifting violently. The air grew incredibly heavy and smelled strongly of ozone and rotting flesh. "You did this," the entity hissed, its voice a perfect, terrifying amalgamation of my wife's voice and Camille's voice. "You built this cage." It raised a long, multi-jointed arm, reaching out for my throat. I closed my eyes, sobbing, waiting for the end. I reached behind me, blindly grabbing the heavy metal push bar of the exit door and pushed with all my remaining strength. The heavy steel door violently gave way with a loud crash. I fell backward, tumbling head over heels down a small flight of concrete stairs. I landed hard on wet asphalt, scraping my face and arms. I gasped for air, the freezing winter wind hitting my lungs. I looked up. I was lying in the middle of a deserted, snowy alleyway. I scrambled to my feet and looked back at the door I had just fallen through. It wasn't the storage facility. It was the rusted back door of an abandoned, boarded-up diner. The storage facility was miles away. I had somehow been ejected into a completely different town. I walked for 3 hours in the freezing cold until I found a gas station and called a cab. When I finally returned to the storage facility the next morning in the daylight, I demanded the manager open Unit 408. When he rolled up the door, my cheap mattress and the space heater were sitting there, completely untouched. But Camille's purse, her keys, and her car in the parking lot were gone. Camille never returned home. Her husband filed a missing persons report. The police interrogated me for hours, but I had a solid alibi. I was seen on a gas station security camera miles away at the time she supposedly vanished. Submitted by Julian P. to the digital archives of thebackroomsarchive.org. Location, Cleveland, Ohio. Date of incident, February 2025. Before we step into an empty corporate office building in Atlanta for our final devastating nightmare, I have a question for you. Julian's guilt literally trapped him in a concrete purgatory. If a distorted reality zone built a maze out of your worst regrets, how long do you think you could survive before it broke your mind? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if these human-centric horrors are keeping you on the edge of your seat, take 1 second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of Creepy Digest. Now, let's head to the basement archives, where the elevator doors are about to open into something far worse than the dark. Story 3. The Fluorescent Purgatory, Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Warren. I am an accountant at a mid-sized corporate firm located in a sprawling, highly isolated office park in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. The office park is a massive complex of identical glass buildings surrounded by dense, overgrown woods. During the day, it is a bustling hub of corporate mediocrity. But after 6 p.m., when the sun goes down and the massive parking lots empty out, it becomes a desolate, deeply unsettling ghost town. My affair with Delilah, a senior project manager from the 3rd floor, was the worst kept secret in the office. We were both deeply unhappily married, clinging to each other out of sheer, pathetic desperation rather than actual love. Our routine was established. We would both volunteer to work late on Thursday nights, waiting for the cleaning crews to finish and leave the building. Once the security guard completed his rounds, the massive glass building was entirely ours. The horrifying reality of our situation broke on a rainy, miserable Thursday in January. It was 9 p.m. Delilah and I were in the break room on the 4th floor, drinking stale coffee and making dangerous plans to leave our spouses. Delilah suddenly realized she had forgotten a highly sensitive physical file in the basement archives, a heavily restricted area used for storing decades of old tax records. "Come down with me," she smirked, grabbing my tie. "It's dark down there." We walked to the central elevator bank. I pressed the button for the basement level. The elevator car hummed loudly as it descended, the digital floor indicator ticking down. 4, 3, 2, 1, B. The heavy metal doors slid open, and the red flags instantly hit me like a physical blow. This was not the basement archives. The archives were a clean, modern, well-lit concrete room filled with metal filing cabinets. The space we were looking at was a sprawling, endless, deeply horrifying nightmare. The walls were covered in a sickly, mono-yellow wallpaper. The floor was lined with a moist, heavily stained, disgusting patterned carpet. The air smelled intensely of ozone, old dust, and wet dog. The only light came from the chaotic, buzzing, flickering fluorescent panels on the low ceiling. "Warren, what floor is this?" Delilah whispered, her grip on my arm tightening painfully. "This isn't the basement." "The elevator must have glitched," I said, my voice trembling. I frantically smashed the closed door button on the panel. The heavy metal doors refused to move. The elevator was completely dead. "We have to step out to find the stairwell," I reasoned, driven by a desperate need to escape the claustrophobic elevator car. We stepped out onto the moist carpet. The squelching sound it made was nauseating. The moment both of our feet crossed the threshold, the heavy elevator doors violently slammed shut behind us with a deafening crash, locking us completely in the yellow labyrinth. Panic seized my chest. "Hello?" I screamed into the endless, repeating yellow corridors. Suddenly, the loud, aggressive buzzing of the fluorescent lights cut out, replaced by a low, rhythmic, wet thumping sound, echoing from the darkness ahead. Something massive was walking toward us on the damp carpet. Delilah screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror, and bolted down the left corridor. "Delilah, wait!" I yelled, sprinting after her. The geometry of the backrooms is intentionally designed to isolate and destroy. I rounded the corner, completely expecting to see Delilah ahead of me. Instead, the hallway stretched for miles, entirely empty. She had vanished completely. "Delilah!" I roared, my voice breaking. I was entirely alone in the yellow purgatory. I walked for hours, completely disoriented, the sickening smell of ozone burning my nostrils. The walls began to change, actively mocking my guilt. The sickly yellow wallpaper began to bleed thick, black ink, forming massive, perfect transcriptions of the illicit, explicit text messages I had sent to Delilah over the past year. My deepest, darkest betrayals were painted in 10-foot letters across the walls. "I love you. My wife doesn't suspect a thing. I want to leave her for you." The labyrinth was a psychological weapon, constructed entirely from my own toxic guilt. Then I heard it, the voice of my wife, echoing from the end of a long, dark corridor. "Warren!" My wife's voice sobbed, sounding heartbroken and devastated. "How could you do this to us?" I froze, tears streaming down my face. I slowly walked toward the voice, compelled by an overwhelming, crushing sense of remorse. I turned the corner, expecting to see my wife standing in the dim light. Instead, I found the entity. It was a towering, lanky, impossibly tall creature. It had limbs that were far too long, dragging on the damp carpet. Its skin was pale and completely translucent, revealing pulsing black veins underneath. It had no face, just a gaping vertical slit lined with razor-sharp teeth. And it was holding Delilah by her throat. Delilah was suspended 3 feet in the air, her face purple, her eyes bulging in absolute terror. She kicked her legs frantically, gasping for air. "Warren, help me," she choked out. The entity slowly turned its faceless head toward me. The vertical slit opened wide, and my wife's voice perfectly echoed from the monster's mouth. "Did you really think you could get away with it, Warren?" the entity hissed, its voice layered with demonic distortion. "Guilt demands a toll." The entity raised its free hand, its long, jagged claws extending, and violently plunged them directly into Delilah's chest. Delilah let out a horrific, gurgling shriek, blood pouring from her mouth, staining her white blouse. The entity dropped her lifeless body onto the moist carpet, turning its full, predatory attention directly toward me. I screamed in pure, unadulterated terror and bolted. I ran faster than I ever thought physically possible. I sprinted through the endless yellow hallways, the entity's heavy, wet footsteps pounding relentlessly right behind me. It was shrieking in my wife's voice, screaming my name, detailing every single lie I had ever told. I was losing stamina. My lungs were burning, my legs feeling like lead. I rounded a sharp corner, slipping hard on the wet carpet, crashing violently into the yellow wall. I scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. The towering entity was standing right in front of me, completely blocking the hallway. It raised its blood-soaked claws, the vertical mouth opening wide to consume me. I closed my eyes, sobbing, waiting for the agonizing pain. I felt a sudden, violent jolt, like being electrocuted. I gasped, my eyes flying open. I was sitting at my desk, on the 3rd floor of the office building. The fluorescent lights above me were humming normally. The digital clock on my computer monitor read 9:05 p.m. I was drenched in cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I frantically patted myself down. There was no blood. There were no claws. I looked around the empty office floor. Everything was completely normal. I jumped out of my chair and sprinted to Delilah's cubicle. She was sitting there, typing on her keyboard, looking completely bored. "Delilah," I gasped, grabbing her shoulders. "Are you okay? How did we get out?" She pushed my hands away, looking at me with a mixture of intense confusion and utter disgust. "Excuse me?" "Warren, what is your problem?" "The basement, the yellow walls, the monster," I stammered, pointing frantically toward the elevator bank. Delilah stared at me coldly. "Warren, I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. And honestly, your behavior right now is highly inappropriate. I am trying to finish this report so I can go home to my husband. Do not touch me again." She turned back to her monitor, completely dismissing me. She didn't remember. The entity hadn't killed her. It had completely, surgically erased our affair from her reality. Delilah had absolutely no memory of our relationship, our texts, or our plans to run away together. Submitted directly by Warren to the digital confession boards at paranormalconfessions.com. Location, Atlanta, Georgia. Date of incident, January 2026. There is a comforting, fragile lie we all tell ourselves when we commit our darkest sins in the shadows. We believe that if no one sees us, the universe won't notice. But as these 3 harrowing accounts prove, the deepest guilt can manifest as a physical maze with absolutely no exit. If you found yourself hunted by a faceless entity that sounded exactly like the person you betrayed, how would you escape? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If these liminal encounters made you check the locks on your doors tonight, hit that like button, subscribe to Creepy Digest, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Stay safe, trust your survival instincts, and whatever you do, never wander down the yellow hallway. Good night.